Matt.
Yes, Thomas.
Have you ever considered any of your tattoos to be prohibitive to your career?
So when I got my job, my full-time job at the University of Essex, my dad in 2013, my dad helped me move all my books to my office, and he saw that next to the door of my office, I had an office, and B, my name was written on a nameplate next to it, and he looked at me and he said, "Son, you wouldn't have got this job if you didn't have tattoos in your hands, would you?" And I went, "Yeah, that's right, Dad." So quite the opposite. I should have got visible tattoos sooner. And I always joke as well, Thomas, that I am less employable with a PhD in art history than I am with tattoos on my face.
Yeah. Like, I can't really talk because obviously despite the fact you are an art historian, I have the weirder job out of the two of us. Like, I am a podcaster and podcast producer. So even when I go for client meetings, it doesn't make a difference at all. But
the world will always need podcast producers, Thomas.
Apparently so. I have found out.
Come the apocalypse. Come the apocalypse.
Yeah, there'll be two guys sitting around
like
a rock formation.
Subscribe.
Yes, like and subscribe. And if you want to like and subscribe, you're very welcome to Beneath the Skin, the show about the history of everything told through the history of tattooing. I am one of your hosts, Thomas O'Mahony, and I am joined by my esteemed co-host and wearing a lovely plaid shirt, Dr. Matt Lauder.
Thank you. It's back, baby.
And we are once again joined by a wonderful, wonderful guest. When I saw he followed us on Instagram, I was like, oh shit, message him immediately. I need to get him on the show.
Slide into those DMs, Thomas.
Yeah, I am a professional DM slider. A lot of this show is me messaging people on Instagram. But we are very welcomed by Joakim Steyls. Did I say that correctly? Please correct me if I didn't.
Pretty much, yeah. It's Joakim Steyls. Thank you so much, guys, for having me on. It's an honor for being invited here. Thank you so much.
Big fan of your work, man. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Nice to hear.
Huge fan. For anyone who isn't familiar, he runs the Jobstoppers Instagram, YouTube, TikTok.
Monetizing other people's misery.
Yes. So,
couple of pennies.
And your speciality is interviewing and photographing heavily tattooed people under the auspices of examining what people would consider are called job stoppers. So I think to begin with, Matt, should we maybe talk about the origins of the idea of the job stopper?
Sure. Well, so the idea of in kind of Western professional tattooing, tattooing on the face, other than I suppose the exception of like beauty tattooing on women, and certainly on the hands and anywhere kind of visible. I mean, that visible even included. Not much was visible in clothing, but like in the professional era, we really weren't getting visible tattooing at all. The tattooing of like faces in particular has been, as we've talked about in a few different episodes, like has been historically a really punitive move. Like ancient Rome, ancient China, ancient Japan, ancient Greece, like a lot of the ancient world had basically forms of like punitive tattooing, and the worse your crime was, the more visible that was going to be. Basically to kind of mark you out as an outcast, to literally to stigmatize you, and to kind of indicate your crimes and your misdeeds to your fellow countrymen and civilians. So the idea of kind of being tattooed on the face was a real like terrible thing. There was a figure in ancient Greek world, a philosopher who was kind of given facial tattooing like miraculously in order to kind of indicate his like mystical engagement with the gods. But in general, like facial tattooing was pretty déclassé. Hand tattooing similarly. I mean, again, right up until the early 19th century, the British Army, amongst other places in the world, were like marking your crimes on your hands with letters like D for deserter or BC for bad character. Was practiced in the British Army right up into the 1860s. So yeah, the idea of like visible tattooing being a kind of impediment to your life is very, very old indeed. And I guess we'll get into some of the reasons, like, you know, the legacies of that, and I guess also the kind of reasons behind it. I was really struck by, you know, a lot of the early like writing about tattooing by European writers in the like early modern period, like Kant, for example, like when Europeans encounter tattooed people in the Americas initially, but then in the Pacific, a big part of the shock that people like Captain Cook and Joseph Banks and you know European explorers in general like find about Maori tattooing in particular is the faciality of it, right? Because to disfigure the face is very, very shocking. So Owen Jones, not the Guardian journalist, a sort of artistic chronicler or a decorative historian in the 1850s, basically wrote in a book that's otherwise about church architecture and decorative art more generally, said, quote, "Tattooing of the human face resorted to by the savage to increase expression by which he seeks to strike terror into his enemies or rivals, or to create what appears to be a new beauty." And Kant, our good buddy Immanuel Kant, also had this idea that, like, you know, tattooing's fine, like art is, you know, lovely, but why are you doing it on your face, bro? Like, Kant said, "A figure is to be beautified with all manner of flourishes and light, but regular lines, as is done by the New Zealanders with their tattooing. We're dealing with anything other than the figure of a human being. Here is one whose rugged features might be softened and given a more pleasing aspect, and he's got to be a man or perhaps a warrior that has to have a warlike appearance." So facial tattooing gets to be like savage, criminal, and warlike, and kind of inhuman, actually. You know, right from these early kind of moments of theorizing about tattooing in European thought.
And also as well, I suppose the Lombrosian, we've spilled a lot of ink about Cesare Lombroso. If you want to hear more about him, Matt is guested.
Are you plugging your other podcast?
Yes, I am, but I'm also doing it as a point. This guy sucked. Matt is going to be on it soon talking about Cesare Lombroso. But the Lombrosian kind of, which led into kind of a eugenicist idea of criminality being inherently associated with tattooing, particularly prominent hand tattooing and to some extent facial tattooing. And
yeah, and then I guess, yeah. So then the idea really, and we like the job, to really answer your question properly, the Jobstopper idea really, the real kind of, you know, and there are figures with facial tattoos throughout the first half of the 20th century as performers in France, in Germany, in America, Omi being one. But the real prohibition, like the real, like, we will not tattoo people's hands and faces, the Jobstopper idea is a product, as again we've talked about a bit on the show before, of the 1960s and 70s, this period that, you know, tends to be called the tattoo renaissance. I have an issue with that framing for various reasons, but in general, at the end of the 1960s, tattooing is at risk of being banned everywhere. It's already banned in New York City. It's nearly banned in England in 1969. It is just prohibited for under 18s. And one of the things that tattooers do in response to that on both sides of the Atlantic is to say, if we don't clean up our act, guys, like, we're not going to be able to make a living doing this anymore. And they don't want people tattooing faces, hands, children, because it's going to basically make the business of tattooing like harder to sustain. And so starting in the 60s, really, I mean, there were examples earlier, but starting in the 60s and certainly through to the like 80s and 90s, the idea that you tattoo someone's face would like get you or hands would get you completely ostracized from the tattoo industry. And people like Ed Hardy and Lyle Tuttle made real hard lines of not tattooing. I mean, Ed had a little tattoo on his that creeped above his neckline, but neither of those guys had tattoos on their hands, and it was completely kind of done. But that was political, right?
And also an important point on the client side, what you have in the post 1960s, more so in the mid 50s onwards, is the evolution of the professional managerial class. That is people who are working in offices. You have the birth of HR culture. Thanks, Elton Mayo. I'm happy you're dead. My most hated thing, HR. which is, the creation of a mediating body that enforces, I suppose, standardization in the workplace as more people are transitioning from manufacturing and more blue collar jobs into office work. You have this class of people that exist within the workplace who are enforcing standardization, which leads to, standing out with facial tattoos, neck tattoos, hand tattoos not being
and don't
accepted.
forget as well, right? Even visible tattoos are not on the hands and faces. There are plenty of tattooed people around, but those people that are tattooed in places that they can hide. And the tattoos that are visible in that period, in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, are on tattoos that, people that are working manual jobs who wear short sleeves at work. So it's all this idea of visibility and stigma like really, really comes together at a really particular moment in that mid-century.
Yeah. But that brings us to our important guest. Joakim, you, I suppose, specialize in interviewing people with prominent tattoos, and a lot of people, like you said earlier, tattoo artists. You've started interviewing a couple of barbers. You mentioned you had photographed a plastic surgeon with very prominent tattoos. I suppose to bring it back a little bit, what is your kind of journey into it? This is an audio only format, so for those listening at home, you don't have any prominent face or hand tattoos. What brought you into this?
I think first and foremost, my personal desire to become better at portrait photography. I've always been interested in tattoos. As you mentioned, I don't have any visible on my face or hands, but I've always been interested in them. And so I want to become better at making portraits. And I felt that there was this abundance of people, models, whatever, being photographed on Instagram, which would not make me stop scrolling Instagram, or which would not stand out to me in the sea of millions of other people. So I wanted to find something, or I wanted to photograph people that would stand out, not just be Jobstoppers, but scroll stoppers as well, to make people stop scrolling their Instagram to see maybe something that they haven't seen before. So I came to the point of maybe I want to photograph people with face tattoos, which kind of coincided also with the rise of like the SoundCloud rapper with face tattoos. There was already a bit of a rise of people with face tattoos. And so I reached out to via to some guys that I knew, just to be like, let's try this out, see where this goes. And in the beginning, because as it also was me trying to get better at portrait photography, I was kind of nervous because I wasn't already doing the portrait photography thing. So I just wanted to learn myself by photographing interesting individuals. So it was a bit messy in the beginning trying to work everything out. But after photographing a couple of guys, I actually learned about, I think, Jona Krank's existence, the person on the cover of my first book. And that pretty much opened a new world to me as well, because I was always interested in face tattoos, or tattoos in general, and more recently face tattoos specifically. But Jona, for the people who don't know or haven't seen him yet, he's almost pretty much completely covered in his face. So that opened a new world as to, okay, there's a lot of people who have not just one or two face tattoos, but have this very extreme look. And I think humans in general are always trying to find like the most extremes in stuff. So for me, it also triggered me to be like, okay, I need to find like the most extreme ones to be able to photograph them, not just because it's visually interesting, but also because they will most likely have an interesting backstory as well. And that's kind of how it, after photographing Jona, who is a well-respected individual in the tattoo scene, obviously, it kind of went rapidly from there. And where in the beginning was mainly me asking people like, hey, can I photograph you for this thing I'm trying to work on? It turned into people messaging me like, hey, I saw you photograph Jona. If you're ever looking for people with a similar look or similar lifestyle, I'm more than happy to be photographed by you as well. And I think in the meantime, 5 or 6 years have passed, and I think I photographed over 120 people. Not all of them as brutal or as extreme as Jona and the likes, but met a lot of amazing people along the way. But first and foremost, I'm because you mentioned the interview thing. That's something that I started more recently. First and foremost, my main thing is the photography part, and actually I also kind of describe it to people more as documenting these people, because I'm not a photographer by trade. I've not been to photography school, so other more artistic photographers may consider my photography work as maybe inferior or whatever. But for me, it's more like I'm happy to be documenting these people, and without being like the most artistic, whatever, revolutionary type of photography. Being applied.
It's as someone who is very interested in photography as well, I think your photography is beautiful, and I was looking at the cameras behind you as well. It's like, it's probably going to be photography was the in.
But I do have some behind me. Yeah,
you photographed my friend, the lovely Raf, quite a lot. Like, those photographs are beautiful. Raphael Delande, he's a bit of a. I mean, it was interesting actually looking at your Instagram page. It feels like Raf's become a bit of a like stylistic trailblazer, because loads of people have now seemed to he's got this very iconic sort of branch work, veiny root pattern on his face that was done by various people, including Duncan X and I think Liam Sparks and John Dix and other people. But now I'm sort of noticing that like quite a few of the people you shot have got like sort of like Raph-esque things, and I'm like, oh man, this is interesting. Like, are you noticing there's a kind of there's a style? Because one of the things I really I find, I got interviewed last week or a couple of weeks ago about facial tattoos, and one of the things I say often when I'm asked about facial tattooing is that I think there's a real difference between bravery and recklessness, right? And I think some people that get their faces tattooed are very stupid and very reckless and shouldn't be doing it. And then some people are very brave and know what they're getting into and make a purposive decision as more or less fully informed. And it doesn't make sense to me to kind of equate them together, because you see a lot of really, really terrible face tattoos. But it seems like maybe I don't know how curated it is, or maybe it's just because of, as you said, the way that you find models. But most of the people that you've shot seem to be of the more brave kind rather than the reckless kind. You haven't got people who've really got really terrible, shitty, fucked up faces. Like, there's lots of really nice, thoughtful, aesthetic.
Yeah, definitely true. I'd be open to photographing both, extreme. Yeah. I'd definitely be open to photographing both, though, because I don't want to. I'm selective on several levels as to who I want to photograph, but it's not a prerequisite to have like nicely done tattoos. If I would be able to set up shop somewhere in the center square of Antwerp and photograph people, off the street, homeless guys with face tattoos, I'd be more than happy to photograph those folks, even though their tattoos might not be as nice as some of or as professionally done as the people I photograph. So having professional looking face tattoos is definitely not a prerequisite, but I do see like just a general trend. And then looping back to when I first met Jona, I actually kind of went through his tagged photos on Instagram and just started seeing so many people whose faces that he tattooed, and I just went and messaged pretty much all of them. So for me, it's kind of a skewed view, because I photographed in the early days of the project. I photographed a lot of people who had the recognizable face tattoos by Jona. So for me, it may or may not have been a pattern, but because I was photographing so many of them, it sure looked like a pattern to me.
I wonder. There's also something kind of interesting about the recent stuff. Not all of your work's black and white, but the recent black and white photography also kind of probably makes that a bit starker. Like, things look, facial tattooing, all tattooing really looks very different in monochrome than it does in full color, right?
Also because the contrast is so hard in contrast. The background is black, so that it doesn't detract from the people that I photographed. And also I actually wanted it to be like very hard and very in your face, while also having like the soft fashionable whatever light. So I'm using like a big softbox, so it's very flattering light. And so I thought it would be interesting to photograph people that look very brutal or very in your face in a, still like a soft way. So,
and I think even from a photography perspective, like I find your photography like so fascinating in the sense of like Cameron Rennie, who is a contemporary of yours, who also does photography of heavily tattooed people. There's a very interesting kind of comparison between the two of you, whereas like you are almost placing the people themselves as art objects alongside their tattooing, which I find fascinating. Obviously, the heavy black background and the quite heavy lighting really brings the tattoos themselves to the fore as well as the person on them. Whereas I think Cameron's approach is slightly different in that it's focusing on the personality of the people. But like for me, I find as someone who's into photography, I find it so striking because it's like it's capturing that person existing in a moment in the studio and the elements of their tattoos, but is making them as much a piece of art as the tattoos. Is that intentional?
Yeah, I think so. And in the beginning, at the point in time where I was still just planning to start a project about portrait photography, I was contemplating like, should I photograph these people in like their natural environment, to place them in like the tattoo shop, which has the typical stuff on the wall, which adds an extra layer of depth to who these people are. But in the end, I decided to just make it just about the people themselves and not include any location. This also obviously helps me as to wherever I want to make the photographs I can, because I have this portable studio setup type of thing. So I kind of shifted to let's let it just be about the people. And actually, in the beginning, I was also contemplating just only photographing faces, to have like this. In my head, I would be like this Instagram page, but just having just heads. Like you have these, and I can't come to the name of the photographer who has like the super recognizable style of. He photographed a lot of celebrities as well, and just photographing heads. But then I would lose so many interesting body tattoos, of course. So I quickly shifted to photographing torsos and backs and full bodies as well, as long as they did have the face tattoos, obviously. But so yeah, no, my conclusion was let it just be about the people, and let the background or whatever not distract from the person that I'm photographing, as that's the most important part in the whole project.
And I think it's interesting as well, like using the black background, it kind of ironically with the name of the project, it decontextualizes the heavy tattooing outside of the world. So it's seeing the people and the tattoos like out of the context that you would see them in the regular world, and comparing that with the idea of Jobstoppers makes you think of it as art foremost rather than contextually how they exist in the world, which I find absolutely fascinating. Matt, what were you going to say?
I was well, that's very different to it. I mean, one of your forebears, I suppose, or predecessors, Derek Ridges, who was photographing a lot of tattooed skinheads, tattooed. I mean, that was sort of, again, one of the sort of literal birth moments of the Jobstoppers. It was a kind of resistance against the tattooers that were doing that kind of stuff. In London in particular, but Ridges is, as you said, Tom, doing something much more contextualized, the decontextualization is really, really, really nice. I mean, I want to ask you, Joakim, like, if you think these people have anything in common other than they've got facial tattoos, because you've got people of a fairly wide range of ages. I mean, a lot of people obviously involved in the industry, but you've got some old, people who had their faces tattooed for a long time, like people like Freddie Corbyn or Lucas Sapira or Yestin. Probably, Freddie Corbyn probably got his face tattooed like in the 90s, I'm guessing. Like Sapira probably in the early 2000s. Yestin probably around the same time. But then you've also got the younger people too. So like, are you noticing that these people have got anything in common, or other than their facial tattoos?
I don't think there's one specific red line that goes through to all of them, besides maybe their just general love for tattooing, because of the fact that I want to photograph so many different individuals. And actually, I want to start a project trying to photograph as many non-tattoo artist people with face tattoos as possible, just to I kind of chose the name Jobstoppers ironically because I want to prove that these people would not be stopped from having a job, and I actually want to photograph as many different professions as possible. And this kind of shifted into just photographing mainly tattoo artists because they mainly have the most brutal and the most far-reaching face tattoos. Where was I going? But as a result of that, I photographed people with face tattoos who were 17, photographed people with face tattoos who were in their 60s. So, and their motivations to get face tattoos are largely different. I think if there's one red line, I don't think so. I've met people who get them as like a filter to keep people that would not be interested in you if you wouldn't have face tattoos at a distance. So if you would walk up to them and just have a chat with them, regardless of them having face tattoos or not, you kind of pass the filter. I've got people that just want to be like, how they describe, set free from the burden of society.
Yeah.
Trying to live.
Yeah, well, that's the bravery that I'm talking about, I guess, right? Because one thing that annoys me intensely, and this is on the reckless side of the ledger, is when you see people generally with quite, not always, but generally people with quite poorly executed and quite kind of ill thought out extensive face tattooing, and then they're complaining in the newspapers that they can't get a job, right? And how unfair it is that they can't work in primary schools or whatever. And I over, for more than a decade now, I've been invited onto news programs when these things, on a slow news day, when these things, and I think that when I'm invited on, they expect me to be the defender of that. And I'm like, I mean, I sort of do wish we did live in a world where it didn't matter what your face looked like or whatever. But like, we do live in that world, and so I have very little sympathy with people who are, kind of crazy, and then are kind of a bit aggrieved. And I think that whole point about the deliberate kind of understanding what the stakes of this, I think, is really important. And I mean, those of your subjects who I do know, I think that probably is the thing that those that I do know seem to share, is that they all understand or understood what they were getting themselves into. I mean, I've got tiny little tattoos on my face, and I wear glasses, so they're often even a little bit kind of obscured by my glasses. And I got them only after I had a PhD in art history. So as I said, I was already less employable than I would be otherwise. But for me, it was a sort of calculate. I mean, risk isn't really the right thing, but it was a calculated decision for me that I liked the kind of tension in a way of like having a PhD, being a kind of middle class guy, and like being educated and stuff, and then and think like and breaking that wall a little bit, within. And push, just for me, in my case, I'm not brave or reckless. Well, maybe I'm reckless. I don't think I am brave, because I wasn't going hardcore. But I'm also, a lot of the figures that I really admire from history, right? Recent history, people like Isabel Varley, right? Do you know about Isabel Varley, Joakim?
No, sorry.
So she's amazing. She was at one point the most tattooed woman in Britain, and she didn't get any tattoos at all until she was about 60 odd. I don't know exactly, but she retired basically and was like, "Fuck, I don't need a job anymore. I can do what the fuck I want." And she ended up getting her whole face tattooed with dicks, like as an elderly lady. And she's like incredible woman. There was another guy similarly in Britain who was a very heavily tattooed man who used to turn up at fetish clubs wearing a kilt, and you could hear him coming. He had so many like genital piercings because he'd clink. But he was a bank manager, and he didn't get any tattoos at all again until the day he retired, and then went with like fuck it, I'm gonna just like live my dream now. And I think what I find so fascinating about this is that, as you said, that relationship to kind of to mainstream society, if you like. And I think the real key thing for me is that whether people understand it or not, whether they know what they're getting themselves in for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially looking at like very young people. It's different from like where you say people who at the moment that they retire, they're like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to get my full full face tattooed. It's different because the impact on their life is, well, it's still the same, but I mean, professionally, it's different because they're at the end of their career. I recently met, photographed, and video interviewed Johnny, American guy who was a Wall Street lawyer, fully tattooed. Up until where his sleeves came, until he retired and then just went all out in the face as well. But it's for me, it's super interesting to see like these types of stories, like the very professional, I mean, Wall Street lawyer who at age, I don't know, 60s and the 50s, whatever, decides to go the extra mile and have his full face covered, because it wasn't like some patchworks styled face tattoos. It was literally fully covered, and now he's actually adding another layer of blastovers on top. So it's super interesting. But these people, and I think that's also the main reason why I switched from doing just the photography to doing the video interviews as well. I mean, I can photograph this person and I can tell you about how kind and nice and well-spoken they are, or I can interview them and you can see it yourself. And I think for the people that are like in my network or audience or whatever you want to call it, they're open to that. But if I would just show a photo of a very tattooed person with face tattoos to somebody on the streets, they would obviously they'd be judgmental. But my hope is that if they hear them speak or see what type of person they are, that might change their mind.
Well, Raphael Deland is one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Like, he's such a chill dude.
This is a point I was going to make, is that like vast majority of like heavily visibly tattooed people I've met are so nice and have like a really beautiful sensitivity about them. And in the recent documentary that I watched on YouTube, Duncan X actually said something like very, very interesting, is that he saw the tattoos as armor. It was like an armor against the world. And I feel there's a very distinct difference. And it comes back to that kind of like recklessness or, you know, a careful consideration, like you said, Matt, that there are people who get heavily tattooed as a kind of almost in the same way that like animals will evolve to off-put predators. It's kind of an armor against the world for people who are sensitive to it, and it gives them this kind of tougher exterior that protects them against the world. And then there is the other element of the intentionally transgressive as well, the people who get heavily visibly tattooed in order to express something inside themselves or to transgress against the social norm, which I think is something that your photography really balances quite well. Of that, like, it's funny, it reminds me so much of like David Bailey's portraiture of like, it's quite stark, but there's a sensitivity and a connection with the people who are your subjects, while also showing this like very intentionally kind of off-putting visage that for the most people might think it's like, oh, that person's scary. But like you said, like, Raf's extremely nice. Almost everyone I've ever met that has like a lot of facial tattoos is just so nice and so kind. Do you find that when you're meeting people and photographing them, that there is that kind of sensitivity there with a lot of people who are heavily tattooed?
I think the large majority of people that I photographed are just super nice people and soft people, and very appreciative and very thankful of me photographing them. And they're very, how should I say it? I think appreciative is a good word to describe it. Like, thank you so much for photographing me. And they think they're in a way, they're also happy to be part of the project. Specifically, I saw you photograph this or that person, and now they are like on the same page as these people that they maybe look up to.
Now you've photographed Freddie Corbyn, no one's going to turn you down ever again.
Like, Freddie Corbyn was actually a very specific situation, because he was in Europe with what's the tour called again? Like where they had a bus, well, the tattoo artist driving across Europe, I think 4 years ago. Tribal Tattoo Tour?
Yeah.
And I messaged him like completely out of the blue. I think I might have had like 1,000 followers or whatever, like thinking like this is gonna go nowhere. So I messaged him like, hey, I saw you'd be in the tattoo shop in the city where I live. Is there any chance that we can get like 10 minutes to photograph you? Because it would mean a lot to me, because I have like this bucket list of people that I want to photograph, and he was up there quite high.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got one of the most important like recent historical facial tattoos. I think because he came out of Ed Hardy's shop, and I think I can't remember where I read it. Someone was saying like no one should get face tattoos unless you're Freddie Corbin. Like he's allowed.
He makes it look he looks so effortlessly having them. Also, it looks like he just had them forever. But
right.
Anyway, I had like 10 minutes to photograph him, and I think I had like two good photos out of that, because he was like back to back booked doing tattoos, and I think I photographed Tony Hundal shortly after, also in like 5 or 10 minutes, just quick. So I didn't really have the chance to like pick his brain or just have a proper conversation, because he was like, I was focusing on making the photos, and he was just focusing on getting back to work, I can assume. So
I mean, I think it'd be interesting to think. I mean, going back to Lombroso, Tom, like I think the Lombrosian theories of tattooing, that particularly view the face as particularly kind of self-injurious and self-hating and self-loathing. But I think actually I'd be interested to know like which way round the pleasant affect and the facial tattooing goes, because I suspect in fact that having facial tattoos almost forces you to be a nicer person, because you've got to like, in order to survive in a world that like, I mean, I'm thinking about people that I know that are really crazy looking, like Eric Sprague, the lizard man, who I walked around Camden with many years ago. And, Camden's a pretty, even back then, was, pretty kind of like tolerant place with lots of strange and interesting, cool looking people walking around. But like Eric Sprague is like completely tattooed green and looks like a lizard. And everyone's stopping and like, literally kind of shocked by his presence. And he is like such a nice, warm, funny, intelligent guy, PhD candidate. But I think there's probably something about having to kind of deal with the fact that people think you're going to be scary that probably makes you nicer. I don't know whether that's true, but it feels like it could be true in some cases anyway.
Hey, are you enjoying the show? If you really like Beneath the Skin and you want to help support us, you can do so on Patreon. For little as £5 a month, you can help make this show possible, help us buy research materials. So if you like the show and you want to support us, consider kicking us a few quid a month, and you'll get everything from bonus episodes to Q&As, and you can even vote on what tattoo I'll get when we reach a certain subscriber count. Matt, have you got anything to say?
You should really definitely fund the Patreon, because tattoo history is massive, right? Deep, wide, complicated. We're covering some big hit topics on the main feed, but on the Patreon subscriber-only feed, we'll be getting into some really more interesting, niche, deep topics you don't want to miss out on. And honestly, the chance to kind of decide what Thomas gets on his body is probably just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
To me, I think
subscribe, chuck us a few quid, don't miss out on the chance to ruin Thomas's body forever.
When you become very heavily tattooed, like both me and you are, visibly tattooed. I wouldn't consider myself like heavily tattooed. I am covered in quite a lot of them, but there's a line that you cross when it's almost like you're a social oddity. Like you're more so like a piece of walking art or a curiosity than like seeming intimidating. And I think, Joakim, your work really focuses on those people who have like gone past that point of like having a couple of visible tattoos that like people will kind of like look at, but more so like these people that invoke curiosity because they have gone so far past a point that there's, the negative space of the skin is overwhelmed with the tattoos. Do you ever find that when you're meeting people that you're photographing and like seeing the reaction of the general public to seeing them as well?
Yeah, it's always funny because, of course, when I shoot people at my place here, there's not much general public around. But I did invite a lot of people to photograph here at my place, and it's always funny to see them. Either they take the bus and the bus stops at the end of the street, and you see them walking down the street, and all my neighbors who are not aware of the project that I'm doing, you see them looking over their fences like, who are all these interesting looking people in our streets these last few years. So it's funny to see the direction of the people.
Brightening up the neighborhood.
Yeah, very much so. But also on other occasions where I photograph them on location and we go to, get something to drink or to eat. It's always funny because I'm no longer triggered by seeing heavily tattooed people, but the general public pretty much is. So for me, I'm just conversating with them, and where you might be in public transport or whatever, but you see other people just staring and whispering. And some cases they might walk up to them, and actually the few occasions where they walked up to them, they were quite nice and quite interested. Like, hey, your tattoos look nice? Can we take a photo with you? But you do see, like, especially with like the very extreme ones, it turns heads, and I think face tattoos in general maybe even has gotten to the point where just having a face tattoo in general doesn't turn heads anymore. I mean, in the past, having just tattoos turns heads, and now we are already past the point that if you have like a small face tattoo, it doesn't turn heads anymore. So I think these people are also trying to push the boundaries a little bit to get like the shock effect, if you want to call it like that tattoos used to have.
I think you're right. If you want to make that move, as you said, kind of like, or change your relationship with your social relations, there is a kind of like ramping up. I mean, I think sort of a lot of, again, I get asked this by journalists. I think a lot of journalists imagine that people sit down and go, "How can I be more shocking today?" And there probably are some people that do that. I mean, I probably think of some people that do that, but that's a small minority of people. I think. I mean, my theory. And I think it's fairly well grounded. My theory about like the rise of facial tattooing is to do with, well, the rise of popularity of like hip hop and rap music in the 90s, because that was very influential on tattooing anyway, and the kind of tattooing that came out of Californian prison culture, and of course like lots of gangs, and we're seeing this at the moment in the news a lot. Used facial tattooing again to stigmatize members, right? To kind of actively actively kind of remove or allow people to remove themselves from society to strengthen their allegiance to the gang culture. You see that a lot in American prison gangs. So there's this kind of like, rise in the sort of aesthetic of US prison culture in popular music, and you get a lot of tattooing amongst African American like artists like Lil Wayne and people like that, Gucci Mane and stuff. But then the other thing, of course, is social media, and this is again something I want to ask you about, Joakim, with the scrolling, right? Because when I was a wee lad in the MySpace era, there was this kind of joke at the time. It was less about facial tattooing really, but it was more about neck and hand tattooing, which we called the MySpace bodysuit, right? Because you could wear a hoodie and go to the Warp Tour, or go to Ozfest, and you could look like you were completely covered, but you'd only spent like, a week's wages, and you'd got your hands and neck tattooed, and it looked like you had a bodysuit on. And I think like, as we've now, in the Instagram era and Facebook era, when we're kind of like, we are our faces online. If you want to present to the world as a tattooed person, for good or for ill, you have to do that on your face to a greater or lesser degree. And I wonder, like, does that? I mean, you said you were kind of thinking about this scrolling. I think that probably is part of it, right? That like there's something about the portrait and the tattooed face, because we see so many faces now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all of them look perfect, whatever. They follow like the norm of what people find beautiful, and I think being able to choose or to I kind of did the project also to celebrate like the individuality of these people, because we're all born with two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and these people are altering their always visible presence in a way that they're not able to hide it anymore. And I think it's very interesting. Also, coming back to what we said before, as to some people might do it just to shock or to scare them. I think it also largely depends on what type of person you are, because I photographed people, for instance, like Chloe White, who is super, super nice, but has like these brutal face tattoos by Yona Krank. And I photographed like heavy, angry looking dudes who have like mandala tattoos in their face. So I think you have to look at the bigger picture as to what's the result of the face tattoos in combination with what the person looks like, maybe even like just their general appearance and style. And their
attitude to life, right?
Also, yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think sorry, because I think like the exact point on that as well is super interesting, because I talk to my I've written quite a lot, and I was teaching about this the other day about plastic surgery, right? And obviously plastic surgery and altered faces is a big discussion in the news right now. And a lot of the standard critiques from sociologists and feminists, particular strands of feminist thinking, is like plastic surgery is bad because it is like painful and violent and bloody. But actually, my critique of plastic surgery is that it's boring, right? Is that it produces like, it produces homogenous normative faces. And actually, I think a lot of the worry about the facial tattooing, from non-tattooed people, a lot of it will be about pain. A lot of it will be about, what will you do when you're older? All those standard things that people worry about tattoos anyway, that are sort of amplified tenfold when it's about the face. But yeah, that's such a good point that we're talking about. Like, it's actually not about the technology. It's not even really about the fact it's a tattoo. It's about this kind of rejection of some kind of mainstream. I mean, there are sort of subcultural normative styles, but like that's quite a different thing to everyone having the same lip fillers, right?
Mm-hmm. But I think as well, like on the point of plastic surgery and stuff, like at its core, plastic surgery is a form of body modification. And also, I think the argument for not necessarily proliferation of plastic surgery, but more so just it existing at all, is that like it is in some ways a form of self-actualization for some people, in the same way that facial tattooing is. I can't remember where I read it ages ago, but it's always stuck with me. And when people ask me like about my tattoos and stuff, because my tattoos don't necessarily have meaning in and of themselves, but I look at tattooing as that like I am not getting a tattoo. I am just revealing the place where the tattoo already was. It was just obscured by, the present or the past. And it's like, I think it's really interesting that there's that tension between facial tattooing being transgressive in society, but facial tattooing as a form of body modification becoming more and more common. Is like, and I know the stupid people are going to be like, oh, well, if facial tattooing is so common, surely the punk thing is going to be not have facial tattoos. And that's for spectator readers and
people
conservatives.
People say that.
Yes,
it's unbelievable.
No, that is a current conversation that's going on online, that people aren't getting tattoos now because they're not cool, because everyone can get them. But I think there is a really, I think there's a really beautiful thing that I think your portraiture really captures, in that the people who are heavily tattooed and tattooed on their face, there's a real strong element that your photography conveys of confidence and self-esteem, and I suppose self-love, that these people have in their bodily integrity, in terms of how they've changed it and how they've taken ownership of who they are. And I was wondering, like, what's your thoughts on that, in terms of like that idea of like self-actualization through tattooing? Like, these people are becoming both different but more of themselves through their tattoos.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like tattooing as a form of just a form of self-expression, but it being in the face,
self-creation as well.
Self-creation,
right?
Self-creation is probably a much better term for it.
Yeah, I think the not the last one, but the previous video I did, I photographed and video interviewed Jay, and he has like these Zodiac killer related tattoos, because he has always been interested in serial killers, and it's just a way for him to express his interest in it, or to share it with the world. As he said during his interview, that talking with people isn't always that easy. So it's just a form of him communicating, like, this is what I like and find interesting. And if you can see that by looking at my face and you're interested as well, we can have a conversation. And he has like lyrics and I know Simpsons tattoos, but also like these serial killer related tattoos. So which is interesting, but it's a way for him to and I think it also makes, not him specifically, but a lot of people that are photographed, makes them feel more complete. And if you would take away all their tattoos, they would not feel as good as they would be feeling in their skin. They would be feeling with the tattoos.
I think that's exactly that difference that Tom mentioned at the beginning, right? Between people who have tattoos, people that like tattooing, and people that are like into tattoos. I think it's I mean, have you found a gender difference? Because obviously, facial tattooing skews male, but then again, all of these kind of social factors are kind of skewed by, enhanced by patriarchy in relation, the women and female presenting people feel.
I think so. So for sure, I photograph more males than females. I also think just seeing what happens online, that if women get face tattoos, they get much more shit for it.
Hell yeah.
Hell
yeah.
Because people, I don't know what the reasoning is behind it, but if you see a guy with face tattoos, or specifically if they're younger girls, they will get a ton of shits for, and they will get criticized for not being able to get anywhere.
Good old sexism that women's bodily integrity, they should be pure, they should be perfect. And
exactly.
We on this show say absolutely fuck that, do what you want.
Exactly.
I wanted to, I don't know, this is a random segue, but it was just in my mind. Do you want to hear the favorite joke I've ever heard about facial tattooing?
Sure.
It's from a show called Wellington Paranormal. And it which was like a thing by Taika Waititi, I think. And the character in that goes, "Oh, my brother got a portrait of his wife's back on his face." The other one goes, "The other way around, surely. Portrait of her face on his back." She's like, no. He stuttered when he went into the tattoo shop and was too embarrassed to correct him. So I think that would be super cool. I was in Paris the other day, and I was talking with Jean Barnicourt, who's a French tattoo historian, about this guy called he was basically, there's like this very, very famous like French criminal from the 1930s and 40s. His real name was Edmond Fauché, but his sort of like street name was like the Living Goblin. You will have seen pictures of this guy. Let me share my screen with you so you can see. He was like living on the streets of Paris in the 1930s, and going by the name the Living Goblin, which I think he's a real forerunner of this. If we think this is something that's just something of the 2000s, like we've got people like this guy to thank.
That's crazy. I mean, I love the look though.
Isn't it so good?
It looks amazing.
Yeah. He was like one of the most famous like tattooed criminals in Paris in the 1940s and 50s. And the living goblin. And I love how like he sort of almost got this kind of like superhero mask.
Yeah.
Kind of shape to his face.
I actually heard it from a lot of people that they really like the look of having like the lined face. So having like the scripts here and just going it around to have like this, like when Iron Man opens his mask, to have that effect. To still have like the I think it's more invasive to have face tattoos like on the cheeks and to have it like on your forehead and whatever. But like the sides, you can still look past it. Well, in a way, you can still. I think you can still look past it once you get to have it like here. Also, one of the guys I interviewed, Raymond, he had some tattoos on the side of his face, but he said as soon as I got like the one on the cheek, it changed because you can't hide anymore.
That's the step. Yeah. Tom will remember the very famous Earth Crisis face tattoos.
Oh yeah,
of the MySpace era. I
mean, Joakim's wearing a Nails t-shirt. Is that for the new album, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So he knows straight edge hardcore all the way. But I think as maybe a final question, as we are coming to time, has doing this project changed how you think about tattoos and specifically think about facial tattoos?
For sure, yeah. I think in the beginnings, photographing people that had these smaller face tattoos, it was new to me, and I was also, I'm not shocked, but I was impressed by seeing what was also available to photograph in like the more extreme corner of tattooing on Instagram. So over the years, my trigger, if you want to call it like that, disappeared completely. I kind of need very extreme looking people to still be impressed or shocked as to to be in wonder as to how did you manage to do that. But I think I'm also along the way trying to convince other people to reconsider their prejudices about it, because I have like some portraits hanging here on the living room wall, and it's always funny to see like people who've never been here sit on the sofa and have a staring contest with like these huge portraits of a heavily tattooed person. And at a certain point, I'll always start telling them about how nice these people are, and tell some anecdotes about how friendly these people are. So I think I've also become like this advocate for not being judgmental of people with face tattoos.
Those deep histories of like tattooed facial portraits. I mean, there was a facial portrait or portrait of a tattooed woman from Canada, what is modern day Canada, Labrador, Baffin Island, on the wall of the Royal Academy the day that Captain Cook first set foot in Tahiti. Okay. Like the tattooed face has been a kind of, artistic interest. Well, I mean, since probably the 17th century, maybe even earlier than that, like since the 15th century. So you're in really good artistic company as well as kind of, anthropological company.
I think also to come back to the portraits that I was talking about, I really love the fact that for me it's become normal seeing and being these people, but I think it's also nice that I'm giving people the opportunity just to blatantly stare at these people. Because if you see them on the subway, you can't move up to them in like 10 centimeters close and start deducting what face tattoos they have. But if you have like these giant portraits and you have all the time to stare and analyze these people's tattoos, I think it's also a nice thing to be able to do so.
I mean, you said you're not just doing faces. You sort of moved on to like other parts of the body. I love all the photos you've taken of the tops of people's heads as well. Because like I got the top of my head tattooed. I'm for a middle-aged man. I wear a lot of hats, but people think I'm probably bald underneath it. But I've actually got quite a good head of hair for a middle-aged man. But I shaved my head and got the top of my head tattooed just because I was running out of room. so I think like
that's a common motivation for a face as well. I mean, people who actually just end up at the point like the face is all I've got left, so let's start doing the face.
I mean, that's literally what I was about to say. Like, I can really sort of, I'm not there yet, but as I said, I was like, there's an amazing design that I wanted. I had nowhere else on my body to put it, and okay, just shave my dome.
And what did you get?
I got a nice tattoo from our good friend Darren Quinn, based on some flash that I researched in Japan. It's a sort of crown of thorns with a chrysanthemum and a little sparrow. The other option was a massive like eagle, like devouring a tiny sparrow, but I'm not a tough guy, so I went with the gentle sparrow and the
that
one's
for me.
I'm a lover, not a fighter.
One thing I did want to mention, and coming back to like the motivations as to when or why people do get face tattoos. One of the interesting ones is that I did photograph some people who were in a health situation that isn't going to become better anytime soon, and they are at this state of mind like, okay, if this is what my life's going to be like for a couple of months, years, whatever short period of time, I'm just going to go all out and do whatever I want and just not give a fuck about whatever people think about me, because I don't really have much to lose after all. And it's super interesting to see how quickly these people go from having like an empty face to having it like completely filled up, just because they can, or because they let themselves they start letting themselves because of their bleak outlook in the future.
Well, it's probably when you break that Rubicon. I mean, I think it's true of tattooing more generally, and certainly true in my own experience of visible tattooing. Once you get one, you've crossed the Rubicon, and there's no going back, and so it doesn't really matter anymore. Have you photographed the same person more than once? Like, have you seen a kind of evolution of a facial project?
Yeah, I love doing it. It's one of the more fun things. I actually photographed Yona on 3 different occasions. I photographed several people on several occasions, and for the next book, I'm planning to have like one spread where I have like the first phase, second phase, and third phase of a specific person that I'll be having in the book, just to adding the dates as well, because I think it's extra nice to see that all these impressive changes maybe only occurred over the period of 2 years, for instance. So I want to highlight that as well. But yeah, I love just documenting the evolution as well. Not if there's like just one face tattoo that is added, but I have some very interesting facial tattoo evolutions over the course of 2 years that I photographed. So
I think those are so fun because a lot of people who become very prominent facially tattooed celebrities, if that's even the right word, in our world, like people whose facial tattoos are very prominent, people don't often, they sort of get to know the finished thing, but not the evolution. We shared some photos that I found of Jack Dracula, the very, very famous tattooed man photographed by Diane Arbus, who, in his later life, we've got photos taken on the day he got his big famous kind of black goggles on his face, and people were like, people were amazed. They'd never seen him really without those tattooed on him. And we posted a photo of him very young. He's got eagles all over his face. Someone was like, that guy's a big Philadelphia Eagles fan, which made me laugh a lot. But yeah, people hadn't, he's got one of the most famous tattooed faces ever, probably, given how famous the photographs of him by Diane Arbus were. But people hadn't seen that evolution or even seen him as a young person with those earlier versions. So I think that kind of documentary of the changing aesthetic is really interesting.
Yeah, especially if you take into account that, people's taste changes over time. And because there's one person, I haven't photographed him. I don't think I've photographed him. He had I think pretty much immediately after having his body filled with mainly patchwork traditional type of tattoos, he just went full on blast over in a period of 1 year time. Just because his interest, even I think it was maybe less than a month after having his last tattoo to fulfill to complete the body, he just changed minds about what he wanted aesthetically and went for the complete blast over suit, which looks super, super nice, but it's and it's very interesting, but it's a completely different look from having the more traditional type of tattoos, of course.
I think that's the tattoo lover thing. Like, my friend Becca is onto her third or fourth bodysuit, right? Because she just loves. She's tiny, so she fills up really, really quickly. So she's like, right, and she's been tattooed by some of the greatest tattooers alive, and she's just like, fuck it, I'm gonna just laser it off or dim it down and then cover it up. I think she is on her third bodysuit because she just loves getting tattooed and being tattooed and stuff so much.
Yeah, and being able to have it change over time, because once you're completely full, then you're in a state of mind okay, this is it for now. But if you start adding new layers, or would you guys prefer lasering away and starting with a blank sheet, or adding another layer on top?
Blast over all the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually think I think they're the same. I think they're the same thing, right? I think laser is also a forward step, right? There's no going backwards. The body project is not reversible.
No, I mean aesthetically.
Aesthetically, yeah. I think, kind of morally, ethically, I think it's the same thing. Laser is another forward step, but yeah, aesthetically. I blacked out some of my sleeve stuff, but it was background. I haven't actually ever had anything properly covered up. But if and when I completely run out of room, probably layer 2. Yeah.
I only have one tattoo that I would consider getting covered up. It's Matt knows which one. I have a Neon Genesis Evangelion tattoo on my arm. It was my first tattoo, and I have been thinking about ways to, because it's deep solid black. And I was
that guy fucked you right up.
I know. His name shall not be mentioned, but I have thought about doing a combination blast over where in the negative space it's black, and then over the tattoo is white ink. So then it transitions over the two, and you can still see it underneath. Because I don't want to cover it up completely, because it's part of me and it's part of my life. But blast over all the way. I love seeing people with sleeves and stuff blasted over. It's so cool.
I'll send you a photo of Johnny, whom I photographed a couple of weeks ago with the full bodysuit, who's now adding his extra layer. It looks amazing. I'm still working on layer 1, so I'm not in leftover zone yet. But it's aesthetically, I think it's just really beautiful. It reminds me. I know if you guys ever did that, where you had these wax crayons and you add ink on top, and then you remove the ink to see the color coming through. It really reminds me of that. And if you have a fully colored bodysuit, it just looks amazing.
Yeah, the palimpsest. And so Becca, shout out to Miss Becca, S6 girl, tiny Miss Becca, on Instagram. her first bodysuit was kind of all like neo trad stuff, and now she's like moved on to like basically a kind of like black work kind of neo tribal esque thing, and it's just it's mind blowing. It looks super cool. Yeah.
But Joakim, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is the zone where you get to plug whatever you want. Where can people find you? Where can people give you money, etc., etc.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you too. Matt, if we ever meet in real life, I need you to sign my book.
Oh, I'd be really happy to. Thank you. You can sign mine of yours as well.
We'll be very happy to do so. So hopefully we get to meet each other in
man,
in real life, and or maybe do a follow-up podcast. You never know. Maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving me the platform, and pretty much it. Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming on the show. And we also have other people we need to thank. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more, we have a Patreon where we post extra episodes and you can hear episodes like this early. If you subscribe at the £15 tier, you get a copy of Matt's new book sent directly to your door. But if you spend £10 and above, you get a lovely shout out. And it's a special thank you to Morpheus Ravenna, Chris Block, Ferris Mueller's Day Off, Shit Jesus, Seb Lewis, Rowe, Reed Forden, Kirsten Wright, Kevin Fish, Kathleen Burkhardt, James Ship, Ava, Edub, Dylan, Charlie Lightning, and Casey Wardell. And thank you to all our Patreons. For as little as £3 a month, you can hear, you can get Matt's love, and you can also get more episodes. And you can also find us on Instagram at Beneath Skin Pod. Thank you very much for listening, and it's goodbye.
Goodbye from me.
Let me quickly make a photo that I can post on my story before we actually head out to plug you guys. Ready? 3, 2, 1.